Ladies and gentlemen, young and old, this may seem an unusual procedure speaking to you before the picture begins, but we have an unusual subject. Turn. When I say that this is the most important motion picture you will ever attend, my motivation is not financial gain, but a firm belief that the delicate fabric that holds all of us together will be ripped apart unless every man, woman, and child in this country sees this film and pays full ticket price, not some bargain matinee cut rate deal. Turn. In the event that you find certain sequences or ideas confusing, please bear in mind that this is your fault, not ours. You will need to see the picture again and again until you understand everything. Turn. In closing, I want to assure you that no expense was incurred bringing this motion picture to your theater. And now, filmed in its entirety and proven to heal minor cuts and abrasions, we proudly present
Director's Cut. This episode, we shift our focus towards a man that has done probably more for the industry than most, and very underrated, I might add, at least by me at first, but digging into this individual was a real treat. My name's Jon Dunning. I'm one of the co-hosts of this very show, and as always, I'm joined by my other co-host, Mr. Jason Alt.
Hey, everybody. I mean, I feel like I underrated him a bit at first, maybe not in recent years. Like, I do remember him being in Oscar contention against himself.
Yeah.
Which, you know, if you're not making good movies, you're not going to be in Oscar contention against yourself. So, you know, he's not like a household name per se, but I feel like he's technically one of the most innovative directors working. And I'm really glad we got to talk about this guy's body of work, because I've been waiting to dig into this, and I feel like we've finally done enough episodes of this show where we have the infrastructure in place to really do justice to somebody of his caliber.
As far as like a household name as a filmmaker, because you think of someone like a Spielberg, and it's just like people go to see a Spielberg film, but you don't go to see a Soderbergh film. But maybe people should. Yeah, let's introduce our special guest. Let's get the niceties out of the way. Who do you have with you?
I have the Brewer's Art Resurrection, which is just like a nice 7% ale, which is just gonna get me through this episode. It's real smooth and mellow. I like the taste of it. It's ale-y, you know, not real not pilsnery. It definitely's got a bite to it, but it's real smooth and drinkable, and I'm glad it's my companion for this episode.
Let's put that in the camera for our video.
Oh yeah, let's do that again. Boom.
That looks tasty. This is a very special returning guest. I drank one of these in 2017. I dubbed this my favorite beer of 2017. This is the Black Raven Featherweather. You can only get it during the holiday. Well, not the holidays, but just when it's cold outside. It's their mocha stout, locally roasted coffee with Congo chocolate. This thing is
woo.
It's just so fantastic.
That sounds like the least fair trade beer ever.
Right? Congo chocolate.
Well, we have slave smuggled coffee beans and Congolese chocolates distilled over blood diamonds and roasted in a bald eagle skull. Wow, look at that. That's you got the proper drinking vessel right there. Look at you.
That's right. That's what I do here. So, l'chaim, sir.
This has nothing to do with Steven Soderbergh, but like I feel like he would approve.
Mm-hmm.
Driving his restored 1940s Beetle around LA. Good for him, man.
Well, with all the other mixing with all the other wine and spirits I've had today, I can't complain. Does it hold up? I don't know. That more on that later. But
how did you just cellar it at room temperature or?
No, it was in my fridge. I made a mistake.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
Okay, that's not ideal, but
it's not. Yeah, noob. This guy.
No, it's all right. It's nice and cold and drinkable. So like, it doesn't matter how much of the flavor you kill. If a beer is nice and cold, it's always nice and tolerable. I feel
it's super roasty. It tastes like a roasted milkshake. It's not as like knock me off my socks as the first time I had it.
Sure.
But it's...
Well, hey, the batches vary so much year to year. It could be them, man. Maybe you didn't ruin it by storing it like a total amateur.
Something that we don't do amateurish is talk about the entire, kind of set the stage, so to speak. This is my favorite part of our show, about everything that this particular filmmaker has produced. And we're talking about, ironically, he's the only thing that he doesn't do is produce, but he does direct. He's a cinematographer. He's
worked as a producer.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, if you ask him about it, yeah.
Yeah, it depends on who you're talking to, right? Marianne, so-and-so, or Peter Andrews. They might tell you differently. But Jason, you are going to keep the reins on this one. You want to tell us a little bit about Steven Soderbergh?
Sure, just running chronologically, kind of down his body of work. We sort of just gave you a chronology of it. So let's just get into it. Let's no more preamble. Typified by intense close-ups, audio and video cues that don't quite match, and a total disregard for linear narrative structure, Steven Soderbergh has been quietly making some of Hollywood's most accessible and profitable movies for decades, seemingly without sacrificing any of his artistic integrity. Since his feature film debut, 1989's camcorder-based drama Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Soderbergh has been defying Hollywood norms, taking risks and reinventing the art form. His eye for conveying his point by what he chooses not to show is evident even in Videotape, and from the beginning he has been making do with less. Videotape had a scant $1 million budget, which was cleverly obscured by a story about a protagonist who videotaped women, which were used to dilute the film, supplementing the expensive film stock scenes with cheaper video interviews. The film didn't suffer for it, and Sex, Lies, and Videotape was nominated for an Oscar for Best Screenplay. Flush with success, he took enormous risk with 1991's Kafka, easily his most underrated film. From Cliff Martinez's score, which felt vaguely reminiscent of Carol Reed's The Third Man, to inspired performances from Jeremy Irons and Ian Holm, and Sir Alec Guinness in his last feature film role, Kafka smacked of the work of a director who wasn't afraid to take a big risk and fail. The movie flopped financially, which didn't stop him from securing $8 million to make King of the Hill, his own adaptation of A.E. Hockner's memoir about life in the Depression-era Midwest. Barely making $1 million in limited releases in the U.S., Soderbergh played it a bit safe with his next effort, a disjointed heist film called The Underneath, adapted from the Don Tracy novel. It's fitting he made a film called King of the Hill, because 1996's self-financed comedy Schizopolis was reminiscent of Mike Judge and other 90s-era MTV films, and it starred Soderbergh in 2 of the lead roles, because he couldn't bear to ask anyone else to work that hard for free. Schizopolis showcased Soderbergh's unique sense of humor, but it's such an obscure film that only the most diehard comedy buffs will have even heard of it. Still not quite back in Hollywood's good graces, Soderbergh helmed the first of 2 Spalding Gray biopics he would eventually direct. The first named Grey's Anatomy, which chronicled a somewhat insane journey into mysticism and alternative medicine embarked on by Gray after he was informed he would need a relatively routine eye surgery. Soderbergh, buoyed by Anatomy's relatively good reception, went on a bit of a tear, beginning with 1998's Out of Sight, which was easily his best work to date and one of his best films ever. Don Cheadle and George Clooney would collaborate frequently with Soderbergh in future features. 1999's Lynchian revenge film The Limey has gone relatively unheralded, but featured strong performances from its entire cast and was relatively successful commercially, though it couldn't hold a candle to his follow-up, 2000's Aaron Brockovich, which won an Oscar and made back half of its colossal $52 million budget just on its opening weekend. The same year, he followed up with Traffic, which was his first 9-figure box office return and which won 4 Oscars, including Best Director, where he beat himself for Aaron Brockovich. Soderbergh was a real Hollywood darling by now, and he wagered his gravitas on a remake of the 1960s Rat Pack romp Ocean's 11. It didn't do as well at the Oscars, but Soderbergh took home more money than Danny Ocean and his crew, and they had to rob 3 casinos to do it. He would follow up with 2 more Oceans, 12 in 2004 and 13 in 2007, but he, in what seemed to be a bit of a one for you, one for me deal with Hollywood, made 2002's Full Frontal, a $2 million dark comedy about a birthday party and the events leading up to it that he almost had called How to Survive a Hotel Room Fire. which was shot on such a shoestring budget that actors like Julia Roberts had to drive themselves to set and forego craft services. Full Frontal was good, and it was funny, and almost no one saw it or cared. Full Frontal holds up, though possibly not as well as 2002 Solaris, the adaptation of the Stanislaw Lem novel and remake of the 1971 film of the same name. 2005's follow-up, Bubble, was another incredibly low-budget effort that was darkly charming and painted a stark and honest picture of small-town life after 9/11. Still not done adapting novels and still not done working with George Clooney, 2006's The Good German met with mixed critical reviews and a big thumbs down from cinema attendees, and it took some of the money he made from cranking out Ocean's 13 to convince Wild Bunch to give him $40 million to make an incredibly ambitious two-part biopic about Che Guevara. Not done taking risks, he cast aspiring clothed film actress Sasha Grey, no relation to Spalding, to play a high-class call girl in 2009's The Girlfriend Experience. He entered the Matt Damon period of his career with 2009's The Informant, which was his funniest film to date, and cast a lot of stand-up comedians in serious roles, elevating the ridiculous circumstances of a price fixer informing on himself. Soderbergh finally addressed Spalding Gray's 2004 suicide with 2010's And Everything Is Going Fine, a collection of monologues that served to eulogize the former late actor. 2011's Contagion, another commercial effort, made back a third of its ambitious $60 million budget the first 2 days it ran, and it reminded the world that what he could do with huge money and the world's most popular actors. Not wanting to follow up the relatively slow-paced Contagion with a dialogue-heavy effort, 2011's Haywire was a kinetic jaunt about a double-crossed spy. If he didn't think he'd follow that up with a movie about male strippers, well, think again, because that's exactly what he did, helming 2012's Magic Mike, which needs no introduction. 2013's Side Effect felt a bit reminiscent of Contagion, but lacked its charm and urgency and made less money than Soderbergh was used to. As the Tatum era began in his career, the Damon era seemed to close with a bang with 2013's HBO-exclusive Liberace biopic, Behind the Candelabra, which suffered a bit for its exclusivity, but nonetheless was a charming and honest look at one of the era's greatest entertainers. 2017's Logan Lucky was a return to the heist genre, and he leveraged that success to make 2018's claustrophobic takedown of for-profit mental health literally shot with an iPhone camera. What's next for the director? Only time will tell, but with indie chops and vast Hollywood commercial success, the man can do whatever he wants.
That's right, and I'm just going to correct you real quick, where you said the Matt Damon era ended a little sooner, but he wasn't insane. Also, when you could get Matt Damon in your movie shot on an iPhone for 5 minutes, you know that you have some clout. I
mean, yeah, he had Matt Damon did play the security expert who came in to advise her about how to deal with her stalker. But that was more of a cameo than it was a Matt Damon feature performance. So it was cool that he got him back, and those two collaborated frequently. And I feel like Soderbergh can bring out the best in Matt Damon more than most directors. And I feel like he elevated Clooney and Brad Pitt as well.
That's what, exactly. He elevates everybody. He makes anybody look Oscar worthy.
Sasha Grey looked Oscar worthy.
Well,
and she's not used to acting with her clothes. You know what? The Girlfriend Experience, for someone like Sasha Grey, who had never really acted in a feature film before, like, to have that be a debut and to work on such a small budget and be given that much freedom just because he read an in-flight magazine about her when she was going to preschools and reading to children to try to become a serious actress. I believe she had she was on Entourage,
yes,
and stuff too. I'm not one to slut shame. I think if Sasha Grey wants to do the incredibly hard work of taking a mainstream tack, trying to get into Hollywood, the fact that Soderbergh was willing to give her a shot, I think was great. And he also took somebody else who was on a pretty non-traditional track, which was Gina Carano, who started out in MMA. He gave her first feature role in the film Haywire, and Gina went on to do other films like Deadpool, where she was fantastic in Deadpool.
Absolutely.
And she looked real formidable. So someone like Gina Carano, who maybe isn't the best actor, but I mean, she can act better than Channing Tatum, so why not give her a chance? And the fact that she could bring physicality to a role and be the badass female protagonist that Soderbergh had always really wanted to cast, I think was perfect. This is a man who will take a ton of risks because he knows that his time in Hollywood is fleeting, right? He's talked about the end of his career on multiple occasions, but it seems like everyone's willing to give Steven Soderbergh some money.
He's going to be there as long as he's challenged. That's why I think he's made films like, Sex, Lies, and Videotape and all the way, full circle to Unsane, where he's putting these kind of speed bumps in front. It's like Michael Jordan's just like, oh, I'm gonna be the best in the world, but I'm gonna wear flip flops. You know what I think it's more akin to? I think it's more akin to Michael Jordan saying, I'm going to play basketball and baseball concurrently. Sure. Yeah.
Because Soderbergh said, I don't make things better if I have more time. I feel like I make them worse. I feel like when I have more time, I act less on instinct. So he likes to keep himself busy. So he will, if he can't book another major studio thing while he's finishing up a studio project, he will book an independent thing, working on a shoestring budget of like $1 million, make everybody drive to set. He's like, dude, I hope you ate at home because we have no craft services. Shoot it handheld. He'll shoot it on an iPhone. He will do whatever he has to do to make sure he's always busy, because when he's distracted and everything's frenetic and he's like, I'm frazzled, he does his best work because he doesn't second guess himself. He shoots from the hip, and that he feels like is his true, filmmaking ethos. When he's not second guessing himself.
That's from his standpoint, and I even saw an interview of him talking about, that choice to get smaller, get more compact. It opens you up a lot more creatively to get into these tight angles and this, that, and the other thing. Do you believe him, or do you just think that he's bored and he wants to do something different?
No. Because I feel like, okay, so.
Shooting if your first didn't make it any better on an iPhone than if it was shot with regular film or at least digital.
No, I think Unsane was as good as it could have been. I don't think he could have made it much better for $40 million more with better cameras. I think the fact that he knew he was going to shoot a movie on iPhones, because Soderbergh's a guy who said shot films are the future, and not like Spielberg's next movie is going to be shot on iPhones, but the next Kevin Smith isn't having to lie and say that he works at the Quick Stop to borrow $10,000 to buy black and white film stock to shoot Clerks. The next Kevin Smith is shooting dirty movies on his iPhone, like how Sam Raimi got started. So when he says iPhones are the future, he means that. He means the next crop of filmmakers are going to cut their teeth because of the platform that the iPhone or like an Android phone gives you, where it gives you instant access to film editing right on the phone. You have like auto zoom and facial recognition and auto dimming and all kind of stuff that like a real DP would need to dick around with lights and all kind of stuff on set. The iPhone can 40% approximate like the work of like 5 Hollywood professionals. That's why he called it the future. And when he said, I'm going to shoot a movie on the iPhone, he picked a script that was perfect for it. Right. Unsane was a ton of close-ups, real claustrophobic shots, all the stuff that benefited the low light from an iPhone, the close-ups, the shakiness of handheld.
Film.
What's that?
It looked like a 1970s film. It looked like we were watching Slivers again or something. And it did work. I'm not saying it didn't work. I'm just saying I think at this point of his career, with how disillusioned he is with the entire system, and I guess we could kind of get into that too, I think he's putting these things in place where he's just like, okay, I'm not going to be, no one's going to give me an Avengers movie because I just have too many ideas for it. And, he even states in some of his interviews where he's just like, where he's, kind of role playing in a parody where he's talking to these studio people, where he's just like, you people don't even know. It's just like, I don't I drive a car, but I don't presume to know how to, fix an engine. And I have to beg for money basically to make
from studio executives who know nothing about how to make a film. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's in that aspect where he's just like, okay, so if I'm going to be that guy, then I'm going to be the guy. I already have my pronounced style. Not every film could be washed in blue and washed in yellow. He can't just keep going back to the well. So now he's going to be the iPhone guy for a while until something else kind of drops.
But he's always been the iPhone guy. Look at his very first film, right? Like one of the best. We always say this every week. Wow, this is one of the best first efforts. But like Sex, Lies, and Videotape wasn't the best first effort because he made a great film.
Right.
He made a $1 million goddamn movie. A great movie for $1 million because he didn't have to buy all the film stock. Instead of shooting black and white like Kevin Smith, he shot a lot on videotape, and he found a script. So if you think about his career bookended by Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Unsane, he went full circle, right? He saw the limitations of film and digital, and he shot on VHS camcorder. And a lot of that footage made it into the film. He even was like, he did interviews that were just improvised, and some of that footage made the film. Like, he knew the limitations of the format. He found a script that he wrote the script basically, that allowed him to dilute the film basically with cheaper camcorder stuff. And it was nominated for an Oscar. Well, his very first film, because he knew his limitations and he worked within the medium that he could afford. And look at the movie he made.
Right. Sex, Lies, and Videotape completely revolutionized what indie film can be, which I think is why he's so kind of salty about that type of film dying. Yes, more indie films are being made than studio films nowadays, but it doesn't matter. That just means that more, as he stated, I'm not going to try to sound analytical and say this is my thing, where it's more people going for a smaller pot, where the studio films they're doing less going for the larger piece. So of course in economics you want to be part of the studio dream, but I absolutely think that restrictions breed
creativity,
and he rides that train into masterful ways, which I don't want to sound like I'm kind of harping on him, but sometimes I just feel like, I don't know, just watching Unsane particularly, I'm just like, I really appreciate what you're doing, but it also was kind of like, are you just doing this as a gimmick? Unsane's a great film because it's a great film. It's a great written film, and most of his films are fantastically written.
But can you imagine, he made Unsane for the exact same budget as Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Does that not blow your mind?
Right.
Because he didn't really say independent films are dying. He says they're losing market share. The big studios they're making fewer movies, but they're also sucking up a larger percentage of market share. And what that means is there are going to be more Avengers, and there's going to be more Transformers, and the major studios aren't going to make Moonlight. But that's okay if you can make Moonlight on an iPhone. Because can you imagine what handheld technology is going to look like in 15 years? You could edit the film on the phone.
We can make Infinity War on our phone, essentially.
Well, maybe not in 10 years, but you could certainly make something like not side effects, Full Frontal. You could make Full Frontal on an iPhone. Because Unsane is practically like his Blair Witch Project,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look like that. In 10, 15 years, the technology is going to be so good that indies will be able to carve out a niche. Mm-hmm. What's getting forced out is the mid-budget, the $15 to $25 million movie. Because they want to spend $60 million advertising their movie, right? The Florida Project got screwed at the Oscars because the production company that made it didn't have enough money to do both of the movies they made that year. So they picked, I think it was 12 Years a Slave instead of the Florida Project, and that's why they just didn't have the money to do the For Your Consideration campaign. So indies they're making good movies. Did you see the Florida Project? That movie was perfect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, and you can make a movie like that for under $20 million, but if it's going to be something that hits major, every cinema in the United States sort of releases, they're going to spend $60 million on it. And if you spend $60 million advertising it, you need to recoup more than that $60 million. So you're probably going to spend $40 million on the movie, and you probably want to make $200 million back, and you're making an Avengers at that point. No one's going to spend $60 million advertising a movie that was made for 10, because that's $70 million. You want to make back 140. No one makes a $10 million movie that makes back 140, and that was his point.
Well, and the point is that it's going to shift from all the like the studio films used to be dramas like Traffic, like those type of films, which I don't think those are going to all have to be shifted to indie money now, because
or Netflix or Amazon, or like
absolutely.
So those people are stepping up. Netflix is just they can't spend cash fast enough, and Disney just pulled billions of dollars of money out of Netflix.
They put $109 million into keeping Friends on Netflix. That's how much capital Netflix has right now.
And you know what? And Netflix stock went down a little bit, but it's headed back up, because Netflix is just like, they're going to film festival and they're paying $8 million for a Shia LaBeouf biopic. Whatever, we got it. They're spread their money around, and they're the ones that are going to buy those $1.5 million iPhone movies and just put them on Netflix and see what happens, because Netflix just needs their platform to be attractive enough to get us to re-up at $12. You don't have to watch that movie. They're tracking how many people watch that movie, certainly.
Absolutely.
But they just want to make their platform attractive enough. So I think maybe these ad hoc Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube's doing stuff too. I think that might be the future of the independent. And that's why he thinks these iPhone movies are a good fit, because Netflix can take a $1.5 million risk. They'll buy that $1.5 million movie for $2 million, stick it up on Netflix, and hope they get eyeballs on it. Whereas a studio will want to, that Jared Leto movie, the Yakuza one, The Outsider, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some billboards, and then it was advertised on the front page of Netflix for a couple weeks. But Hollywood would have spent $60 million on that. Like, what did you make it for? 10? We need to make back 140.
Didn't they
There's
say that
so
Bird Box,
much.
if it was theatrically released, it would have made over $100 million?
I mean, maybe, but it would have cost over 120.
So exactly. So why even risk it? It's like you have this platform where you can just throw it up like a streaming service, and the overhead, you get to keep more of the pie for the filmmaker and the streamer. So it's crazy stuff. And that's, a lot of the filmmakers that we talk about, like Cronenberg and everyone, have kind of spelled out the death knell of cinema, and cinema, going to...
we should... A lot of this we're extrapolating a lot from a 20-minute interview we watched Soderbergh give, and we're going to put a link to that interview in the show notes, because we think it's an important compendium to this episode, because it informed a lot of what we're talking about. But Soderbergh defined cinema as something like, it wouldn't have gotten made if that person hadn't done it.
Right.
If James Gunn doesn't make Guardians of the Galaxy 3, maybe you can give it to somebody else. But nobody else was going to make Unshan Andalou or something like that. Nobody else is going to make Primer.
Right.
And that's what he's talking about. Maybe cinema dies, and you can't per se make cinema on an iPhone, but film as a visual storytelling medium is never going away. So we talked a lot about this, and what does all this about Hollywood's accounting have to do with Soderbergh? Well, the interview we're talking about it wasn't an interview. He was giving the state of the industry address, and he talked a lot about these budgetary concerns, and it's not like he only makes these handheld movie, because he made right before that he made Logan Lucky, which had a $29 million budget, and it only had an $8 million opening weekend, and everybody was super fine with that because it made $48 million in the US.
And that was the movie that got him off the bench. I mean, right after Side Effects, how poorly Side Effects was received.
Side Effects they thought it would make Contagion money,
right?
And it didn't, because it should have. Side Effects was basically Contagion, but with worse actors. we can talk about this now. Between Side Effects and Logan Lucky, he made Behind the Candelabra, which would not have gotten made by a studio.
Right.
And this was like why this interview is so insightful. This address he gave is so insightful because it tells you why he even made Behind the Candelabra, which if you saw it was just, I don't give a shit about Liberace per se. I'm too young. I didn't like have a conception of what a popular entertainer and what a cultural force, and like the fact that he denied being homosexual for so long, like all that.
It was like watching an Elton John biopic almost.
Well, Hollywood wouldn't have given $25 million to make Behind the Candelabra because it would have, like he kept saying, would have spent 60, and they're like, it cost 85. We got to make 170 back.
It was too much of a specialized audience. Absolutely. And
But
that's what they said about Magic Mike, too, before it was out. And then it went gangbusters when it came on the screen. No pun intended.
What's the pun?
I don't know, Magic Mike coming on the screen. I don't know.
Oh, coming.
Yeah.
I was thinking there was a pun with gangbusters. I'm like,
we're not going to be all highbrow all the time.
All right. I see a lot of people out there in the audience tonight. They're wondering, hey, Matthew McConaughey, you have to pay to take your shirt off because I feel like you really wanted to take your shirt off. And I was like, yeah, I did, man. Other bongos I can play around here, man. Time is a flat circle.
And here's the thing, though, like he takes these. I mean, Magic Mike, the story. If you just completely take off the aesthetics of it and all the bells and whistles. I try to be as non-sexual with my adjectives as possible.
Be sexual, like Magic Mike.
Yeah, without the dongs, right?
Before Louis C.K. got canceled, he had a great bit about Magic Mike about how he never watched it to the end of the movie because he knew if he like the last scene of the movie was he's gay.
Right. But it's just really just a story. It's like the underdog story. That's all it is. I mean, go watch it.
It's Aaron Brockovich with,
songs. Yeah.
Kind of. He's kind of like, I want to make a cupcake business. It's not a cupcake business. It was furniture, but still, I want to make it.
You're watching that NFL commercial. Yeah.
I did watch it.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
We made a cupcake business. Don't eat my cupcakes. That's my profit. Shut up. Let's go make tables.
Yeah, but I mean, he takes these inspired stories, but you never know because he is such a good dialogue writer. He's such a good scene setter. His shot composition makes everything great. But there is times when it doesn't work. Like I did find quite a bit of enjoyment in like the girlfriend experience, but the difference between you need those Soderbergh moments like you have in Side Effects where it's just like, where it's some of his movies kind of digress a little bit into conversation soup, and you kind of get lulled into this just like watching people talk in rooms, which is fine because it's interesting. Even like Solaris, but then Solaris punches you in the face with something just like, oh shit, I'm re-upped. Like my excitement is reinvested in this film I'm watching. Where
he likes those spikes of adrenaline to keep you watching again.
Side Effect is just like she's stabbing the dude out of nowhere, and it's so creepy and so nuts. It woke me up from almost nodding off at 3 a.m, and I was back into it. I was like, yes.
We could talk about, I think this is a good time to just dive into it and talk about what makes Soderbergh unique and
his visual cues.
A quote, yeah, of course. A quote from Soderbergh himself is he feels like his style of film was born of a desire to find a new way to give the audience information about the story and the character. He thought there has to be a better way to lay things out for people, or at least you can be more adventurous and release information in a way that's less traditional. And I don't think he found a better way to give the audience information about the story. I think he found dozens of innovative ways to really dissect a typical scene in a Soderbergh film. Like take, for example, the shot in Ocean's 12, where Clooney sits down at the bank manager's desk and he says, hey, I was a high school basketball coach. Here's the money I want to invest. And the guy's like, wow, you've done quite well for yourself. You get all the expositional information you need with very little dialogue about it. And the camera doesn't move. Like in typical films, it's like they do an establishing shot of the outside of the bank and then they'll label it bank. 10 a.m. And then he sits down, and
they'll
sometimes
zoom in on a bag of money with the money sign on it.
Yeah, and then they'll do a shot of Clooney sitting down, like over his shoulder. You'll see the bank manager, and then over the bank manager's shoulder, you'll see Clooney. Then they do a close up on the bank manager saying, "Brr, you got the money," and then Clooney's going, "Brr, I got the money," or whatever. Like, that's typically how scenes are done, and it's done so frequently in every movie that you don't even notice. But like, a Soderbergh shot is so different from that because of that desire. What he said in that quote, there has to be a better way to release information in a way that's less traditional. So he will just mount the camera on the desk of the bank manager. So you don't even see the bank manager. You see Clooney from underneath, from like his right side, and he's talking, and you hear the bank manager talking, but don't see him. They never cut to a shot of the bank manager's face. But you know he's the bank manager because it's a bank, right? And he's like, "You need a loan, or you're investing your money or whatever." He doesn't give you anything you don't need. I called Soderbergh a don't show or tell director, because he doesn't show you anything or tell you anything or spoon feed you anything you don't really need, because he knows the audience can figure out 70% of what other movies will spoon feed them. So he will do a shot from a stationary camera that is a 2-minute uninterrupted take of George Clooney's face. Only his half of the conversation. You hear the other person, you see Clooney's face, and he does shots like that all the time. That is so Soderbergh. That's just a thing he developed. He loves the stationary. He loves the over the shoulder sometimes, but sometimes the over the shoulder is a stationary camera, and other times he's handheld. There was there were movies where he said, I think there were only 3 shots in traffic I used a tripod for. So, other movies it's way more frenetic based on what the scene calls for. But if you look at how a typical scene works, where they do the outside establishing shot, then the over the shoulder, the close up, he doesn't do any of that because it's not necessary, and that's his style.
It's
He's
POV
looking
without having to be POV. It's not POV like you're
exactly
walking around looking. It's you're the guy on the couch, or you're the guy at the desk with them, and you get to see more of the reactions from your main characters too, which I appreciate. Yeah. It doesn't matter what the bank manager, because you've seen bank.
Who gives a shit? Yeah, exactly. The bank manager doesn't matter. He's some dude that got paid the SAG rate. Look at George fucking Clooney, because that's who you paid $25 million to be in your movie.
Danny Ocean's game, like, that is part of his character, is you get to see the nuance of his reactions playing table tennis with this guy back and forth of setting up this bum account. And that's what I appreciate. He does that so much, as well as which is a little disjointing at first. He had almost a tinge of Malick, but he has these scenes that are just like, stuff's going on, and then we're already on the next scene audibly, and then we eventually
he will play the new scene's audio over the previous scene's visual, and that's another that's another just example of him breaking convention. He will show audio and visual that don't line up, or he will show non-chronological. Like in the Limey, one of the best introductions of a character was like, "Oh, it's this guy. Who's that guy?" And instead of like having some dumb exposition, like, "Well, he's a video director and he lives in the Hollywood Hills, Mulholland Drive, and he's got all this money." They did a music video to introduce the character.
Peter Fonda is unwatchable in that film. He's like, the whole time, just
with those veneers, but it was so good. They did like a video montage set to music. The guy got a music video, and they've never introduced a character like that. Yeah. And The Limey wasn't really a movie that was critically acclaimed. Nobody like talks about The Limey. Like, it was a movie that he's like, "Wow, that was so much fun. I want to work with Luis Guzman again," sort of a deal, right? But like,
Jason, one of the best action scenes I've ever seen in a film is the Limey's off-camera action scene.
Oh, in the background when they're yes,
absolutely.
When the security guy goes out to confront him, and then you're focusing on Peter Fonda as the dude gets hip tossed over the railing.
Well, that too. I'm talking about when, oh god, Terrence Stamp gets the shit kicked out of him, gets thrown out in the back alley, and then just nonchalantly gets up like the Terminator.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then all you hear are the gunshots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
And that's how Soderbergh, because like you don't need to do an over the shoulder like Steadicam shot of him going on his rampage. You assume the guy goes back in there with the piece he pulled out of his ankle holster, and nobody's ready for him. And you just hear the shots and the dude screaming. You already know exactly every character is involved. Because in the previous scene, 4 dudes drag him outside. You know who's inside. You know exactly what's going on. And
you know how many shots. It's just so precise. It's just the best kind of scene, and it's very unconventional. And this is when he does everything perfectly, when he has these fun takes on what an action scene could be. It's not shaky cam, it's not close up, that argument. It's, hey, fill in the blanks with your mind. And that scene was no less rich than if we saw everything on screen. You
don't need squibs and
now,
and like a John Woo diving behind a table, firing dualies. Like you don't. I mean, that's cool when that's what the movie calls for. But the Limey wasn't about that. The movie wasn't about that. So like you knew what the guy, he was all business. You know exactly what he did. He just went in here and went back in and shot everybody. Yeah, and it's funny that we both had a scene in mind when we talked about, something happened off camera. I was talking about the scene where, like, in the background, you see the security guard get tossed over the railing at the house.
And at the end, it does the same thing when they're all sitting there waiting in the kitchen. It's almost shot as a horror film. In that scene where it's just one by one,
where it's like they're waiting for the zombies to come,
and you see the bodyguard. And then you cut away, you see them kind of talking and conversing, you cut back and you see the end result. And that it was great. It was no less riveting than if we saw this, Terrence Stamp punch the guy in the face. It was great. I loved it.
There's so much that you just don't need. And there's a great scene in Traffic where you see Benicio del Toro get handed a folder. You don't get it spoon-fed. You don't know what the guy looks like. So the next time you see a scene, there's like a cantina in Mexico. You figure out it's a gay bar a little bit later, right? And you just see a guy. You have no idea who he is until Benicio del Toro comes over and he puts the pack of cigarettes with the condom down. And the guy's like, all right, this is happening. And he gives him a cigarette and he holds Benicio del Toro's hand, where he lights a cigarette with a match, and then they look at each other. You get a close-up on both of their faces, and in the next scene, the guy's bleeding in the back of the car, tied up. And you know what? You didn't need that shit spoon-fed you. You didn't need him to be like, here's the dossier, here's the guy, here's his picture. And then Del Toro's like, well, I'm planning to pretend to be a gay dude too, and I'm going to go blah, blah, blah. You figured it all out because you're not an idiot.
Right.
He gives the audience enough...
And this is why I don't like Malick as much as I do, because he has to tell everything in voiceover, where Soderbergh just makes these interesting choices. The other thing,
but like that's what he does. That's his style, because he trusts the audience.
But that's the thing. Whether that's a style or not, whether it's a stylistic choice, it's a choice to trust the people that are consuming your art. And that's what I appreciate the most. I like his choice of using jump cuts unconventionally to tell a story rather than progress a scene, like in Sex, Lies, and Videotape, where James Spader is ripping through all the tapes and everything, and just the way that he deploys the jump scene or the jump cuts, it just tells the story at a much brisker pace. It adds freneticism to it. It adds just kind of emotion in just something that is supposed to be used as a post-production tool to trim your movie down. he uses every aspect of the spectrum of filmmaking, and that's because I think he takes so much on, because he writes most of his work,
or at least he adapts. He does a lot of adaptation, but even when he does, he's the one who writes the screenplay, and sometimes that gets him fired from Moneyball, and sometimes that sees him do a great adaptation of Ocean's 11 where he kept very little of it.
Yep.
If you watch, I mean, who hasn't seen the 1970s Rat Pack version of the Ocean's 11? He made a better, he made a more fun movie.
It was a blast to watch, and I think it's just like you look at something like Contagion, and the same guy directs the Ocean movies, but
Magic Mike,
but he even said that making an Ocean's movie was more challenging. Any of the three was more challenging than making Traffic. Traffic was, he just made a great kind of Oscar baity film, where Ocean's and Logan challenged him as an actual medium teller, and that's the thing that kind of fuels.
He understands how Hollywood works, and as much as he's bucking against the system a little bit, he understands that if someone's going to give him $50 million goddamn dollars to make the movie, he better make $230 back. Yeah.
And he's the first one to say this sucks. He sends people out of the room. He's just like, I got to fix this, and I don't want to. It's none of your people's problem. It's me. I'm taking all this on. That's a hard way to live as far as filmmaking goes, because that's a lot on your plate. But I mean, that's where he thrives, and you can tell that he doesn't half-ass any of his films. Whether you like all his films or not, he's still putting 100% of himself, whether it be in the storytelling or the actual, tactile composition of every single scene. Let's talk a little bit about his storytelling through the visual medium, and when he's kind of beating you over the head with it, when he is,
I don't know that he ever, I think,
you know where I'm going with it.
No, I do. And what I want to say briefly is that, I didn't realize what a sense of humor he had until I really started doing this, because I found the obvious stuff like, hey, let's do The Informant, which was a serious novel. Let's do it as a comedy. Or, hey, let's make Schizopolis, which is basically like, what if Mike Judge had been given $15 million in 96? Like, he made Schizopolis for nothing. You get to see his sense of humor a lot in broad strokes in some of the comedic films he does, but I feel like he's got a real sense of humor that you kind of see in the more serious scenes, where if you think about it, what a parsimonious director he is. Mm-hmm. Anytime he cuts to something for like a second or two, that wasn't a wasted shot. He was trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
Like when Catherine Zeta-Jones said she didn't order duck, her fetus ordered duck. Haha. Oh, it's such a great meat, and then there's like ducks on the golf course, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like the ducks are like, "Hey, fuck you!" Like it's sort of. Yeah. He uses these shortcuts of something that exposes either the hypocrisy or the delusion of what someone's saying in their dialogue. There are so many examples of that where he just does a real quick cut to be like, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about because this thing that's right in the scene with them that they don't see sort of belies what they're saying. And he subverts his own dialogue so often and in such a way that if you're not looking for it, you don't catch it, that I think he's underrated as a dark comedic director.
Well, sometimes he lets the scenes progress as he is a real student of the medium, and he knows that certain scenes need to happen. But then I feel like he takes himself out in like a fourth wall where he views himself as the audience, where he's just like, this scene is so movie, so I'm going to add this little Easter egg to kind of break it up for the people that are actually paying attention.
You know what's so funny? A line of dialogue from The Informant, which was just great. And I was glad I even watched it again, even though I felt like I didn't need to, because I've seen it very recently. There's a line of dialogue. It was Bakula talking to Damon where he goes, so you see yourself as wearing a white hat and everyone else is wearing a black hat. And when when you think about things in those simple terms, you realize that Soderbergh hates those sort of conventions. Otherwise, Michael Douglas's character in Traffic would have been like a dude in a white hat just rampaging through and like, I will break up the cartels. But he's not a dude in a white hat. He's a dude who can't even keep track of his own daughter under his own nose, right?
Right. If anyone,
So,
that guy should be able to. Yeah.
well, he's never home, ironically. He's so busy fighting the war on drugs abroad, he can't fight the war on drugs at home. And that's a Soderbergh protagonist. It's not someone in a white hat. It's like nobody has a white hat. Everybody thinks they have a white hat, right?
Protagonists lose all the time too, especially in his heist films. They're
Yeah.
coming up short, or always coming up on the wrong end of things with Logan Lucky and all the Ocean's movies. I think The Informant is more autobiographical than people really understand, because there was a moment when like right after Sex Lies, he was really in a weird spot. And I mean, that it's kind of flirting when he kind of lost it really in the industry, made Schizopolis, which I don't hold as high esteem as most. I don't think it's as hallowed as it should be. I feel like it's a student film.
You know what? It was a student film, but it was sort of like, here's my comedy student film. I have 4 serious movies under my belt. I want to try to make a dumb movie, and nobody wants to help me. So I'm not going to ask any of my friends to work on this movie for free. So I will play 2 of the main characters, and I will use my own car in the movie.
Yeah.
And I will shoot it on my own schedule and get a year to make a 90-minute movie, because it's something I want to do. And the fact that he had to make his Clerks 5th is hilarious.
It was a little mean-spirited, though. I know it's very satirical, especially the intro, but I mean, he was coming off something, and he was real salty. He was almost, going to. It was basically his happy.
You found it it was sort of like a low-budget Office Space to an extent, right? But he was, I don't know, he was shitting on like bored housewives and corporate culture and Scientology and just a lot of things, and none of it felt like anything that he personally dealt with. It was just sort of like, so here's some garbage.
He was thumbing his nose. It was an outburst on Twitter, basically. And then,
yeah, that's fair.
And then now, and then he's like, okay, I am a good filmmaker. I am in the club. I'm going to make, Out of Sight. It took him Grey's Anatomy.
But I feel like if he hadn't made Schizopolis for $2 million, he might not have made as good an Out of Sight, because I feel like he learned a ton shooting on a shoestring and failing, right? He said it's a direct quote. He said he learned more from his failures than from his successes. And people always say that. And it sounds trite at this point, but I kind of think anybody who's ever made anything knows that to be a universal truth. So it sounds trite, but you do learn from your failures. And what if your failure cost $1 million and everybody got paid and all your friends got to a film credit, and you got to experiment with being the cinematographer in a completely low stakes environment? He learned so much about being his own cinematographer, to the extent that he sneakily is his own cinematographer on a lot of movies. If you look in a lot of his movies on IMDb, if you see the name Peter Andrews, that's him. That's a pseudonym. He's doing the cinematography under the pseudonym Peter Andrews, because he taught himself on the low budget movies he made for nothing, because it was low stakes and he got to experiment. And yeah, he learned a lot. It's so funny that he made a student film feeling movie 5th, right? You would think Schizopolis would have been his first movie, and Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, super polished, right? Great film, would have been 5th, but that's not how it worked out. Just because he felt like there was some things to learn he could make by making Schizopolis, and he learned them.
And not only is Peter Andrews him, but Marianne Bernard, the editor on most of the Steven Soderbergh films, is him as well. So he is controlling it from, shooting it, directing it, storyboarding, most of the time writing it, and then editing it too, where it's But that's where you find the care. It doesn't feel like it's a film made in a room by studio people. It feels like it's someone's message, whether it just be about male strippers or an escort, people talking in a room, you know, an escort giving you an interview. It still feels riveting because it feels like someone gives a shit about it.
Yeah.
And that's just not something that happens really anymore. I mean, yes, there are some flashy ass directors and filmmakers out there. You have your Edgar Wrights, and you know, I would say that Baby Driver is on par as good as Logan Lucky, and those two came out very close to each other. So a lot of people put those two together, but just watching Logan, you know, if you on paper, Logan Lucky shouldn't have worked. It's just like, oh, Soderbergh's back. He's coming off the bench and making another heist film, but now it's about NASA.
Logan Lucky kind of felt like Mud Puddles 11, right? Like,
yeah. And then of course it comes out and you put Channing Tatum and Adam Driver in it, and it's hilarious. It's great. It's a good time at the cinema. And it shouldn't have worked, but it does because he just knows how to. It's something that challenges him, and he knows.
It was Channing Tatum, Adam Driver, and Daniel Craig. He didn't put a single person in that movie who knew how to act, and it was still great.
And Daniel Craig is your Zach Galifianakis character. Like,
right.
Why should that work? It shouldn't, and it absolutely does.
I got a ton out of that character as a chemist too, because I understood everything he was saying, which was. It's like, give me them gummy bears. I'm like, oh shit, I know what he's doing.
Oh, well, better making that than cough syrup. That's another show that we did. I don't know. I really like, my favorite type of Soderbergh movies are I mean, he does the ensemble cast so well. But I love the Contagion one. I love Contagion. I love Side Effects. I love those back and forth kind of. They almost feel like they're heist films because there's just such a huge MacGuffin that everyone has to overcome. But it's just handled in a little bit more of a serious tone, and I think it works really well when it's just kind of when he goes a little bit more madcap. Yes, the ocean films are mostly fun, especially the first one, maybe a little bit of 13. But I just love the frenetic pace that he adds to these serious dramas. And talking about ambiguous characters like Jude Law, someone said, I hated Contagion because I couldn't tell if Jude Law was an asshole or if he was the protagonist. And Steven Soderbergh took that as the highest compliment because that's the type of character that he is. He's like, yeah, that's what I was going for.
You're not supposed, because like it's just a guy profiteering.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
a real person.
But that there are archetypes, right? Most people are guy looting Walgreens, right? In that scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Most people are guy trampling other guy when you find out there's no more MREs. That's who 90% of the people are. But there's always the guy who works at CDC character archetype, and there's profiteer type. In that scenario, they're all kind of people, and you need the Jude Law just to flesh out.
Most other directors would handle someone like that, the Forsythius chemist off screen.
Give him a black hat.
Well, yeah, you would see like newspaper clippings about this. You know, Dr. Ryan Bad Guy said, Well,
he wasn't a doctor. He was a blogger. He was the Oprah Winfrey / Jenny McCarthy of that scenario.
No one else would actually flesh out a character and make you think, whoa.
Yeah, maybe not no one else, but like he certainly did it very well. And the fact, you said it exactly right. He took it as the highest compliment that somebody felt ambivalent about Jude Law's character because guess what? He wasn't wearing a black hat, and Lawrence Fishburne wasn't wearing a white hat because fucking real life isn't like that.
Yep. Solaris is out of sight in space, and it works so well because it's just.
And he made it after out of. He's like, oh, well, it was it was a remake of another movie. He's done remakes.
Yep.
With like Solaris and the Oceans films. He's done book adaptations, like with The Underneath, and he's done original stuff like Schizopolis. He's done biopics. He did 2 Spalding Gray biopics, and he did 2 Che Guevara biopics. He's done his own original stuff. He's done handheld. He did a completely handheld iPhone movie. He's done big Hollywood blockbusters that made $100 million. Like, what hasn't this man done?
Are we talking about him as a greater film community?
Because you know what? I feel like anybody who really is serious about film gets it, because the man beat himself for an Oscar in 2000. And as much as that was like 20 years ago, like, what have you done lately? Well, he's made a lot of money, and he's lost a lot of money.
There's a rub about him, though, where people are just like, yeah, Soderbergh, but, it just feels like he has this black eye, and maybe it's just because of...
I think it's self-imposed. I think he dislikes Hollywood more than Hollywood dislikes him.
Maybe, but Hollywood studios aren't making Steven Soderbergh films anymore. They're making...
Well, they're not making the Full Frontal.
Right.
They're making the Ocean's 8. Right?
Yeah.
So if he wants to get in bed with Hollywood, if he's like, here's a script I like, I need this much money to make it, I will go talk to Miramax. I want to make Moneyball. I feel like Moneyball needs this much this much money. I'll go talk to, this studio. I feel like I can make Full Frontal by myself with a one handheld camera, $2 million and no craft services. I feel like I can shoot Full Frontal for $2 million. And you know what? I love Full Frontal. I'd never seen anything about it. I had no idea what it was. My mother just bought the DVD for me for Christmas. She does stuff like that. I've gotten so many just rando DVDs from my mom. I'm like, what the fuck is this? And then I watched it. I was like, I remember I was so mad. One year for Christmas, my brother got Training Day. And I was like, Training Day, that's awesome. That's such a great movie. And I opened up the movie she got me, and it was a movie I'd never heard of. And I was so pissed off. I was like, what is this bullshit? You got him Training Day, and you got me some bullshit piece of crap that and I just threw it in my pile of DVDs, and I took it to college with me. And then 6 months later, I watched it, and I really enjoyed it. And that movie was Memento. Right?
Which he goes on a diatribe about.
He does. Yeah, he talks about Memento, about how Memento almost didn't get made. Until someone's like, look, if Hollywood doesn't want to give us the money, we will start our own production company.
Yep.
And get the money to make Memento. Memento was a movie that got pulled out of the literal recycling bin of Hollywood.
That was one of those points where he's like, Hollywood is dead. Like, this is done. Film making as we know it. If this masterpiece can't get...
Yeah. If no one gives a shit about Memento, what choice do I have? Yeah. Yeah. Who's going to make Contagion? Who's going to give him money to make Haywire? Because Haywire was like... And it's so funny, sometimes elevator pitches are so bad. When he was elevator pitched Aaron Brockovich, he's like, what the fuck is this? What makes you think I would want to make this?
Yeah.
And then he went and he made another movie. And as he was making the other movie, they sent him the script to Aaron Brockovich anyway. And he read it. He was like, oh, I fucked up. I do want to make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he was busy making the Limey. So he was doing post-production on the Limey, and someone sent him the script for Aaron Brockovich anyway, even though he turned it down. He was like, oh, shit. So, so many people, so many Christian Bales make so many Captain Corelli's mandolins, but they turn down, whatever, Yeah. You read all these stories can you believe Reese Witherspoon turned down blah, blah, blah. It's like, yes, I can, because a script is a script.
Yeah.
And you get sent hundreds as a Reese Witherspoon,
Christian the Machinist. He had to really do a lot of work for that. So.
Well, and don't give a fucking hot fart about The Machinist, right?
Yeah.
He got down to 80 pounds because he ate an apple and drank a cup of coffee every day. And it
didn't sell because no one even...
And it was a scary stories to tell in the dark story for 2 hours. Have you seen The Machinist?
Fucking A, I've seen The Machinist.
Yeah, it was just oh, cool. Toe thumbs probably isn't real, right? It was such bullshit. It's why would you get to 80 pounds? Did you read the script, idiot?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I'm so weak. Oh, no, if you excuse me, I got to go to the gym and put on fucking 90 pounds of muscle to be Batman.
Yeah, it's be Batman now. Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been easier to not make The Machinist for no one? It's so hard to know what's going to be a good movie. And Soderbergh's had his misses too, but for the most part,
yeah.
For every what makes you think I want to make Aaron Brockovich? He has had the equivalent. Oh shit. I'll make Aaron Brockovich. So good for him.
Has anyone ever beat themselves in the same year for an Oscar?
Oh, I'm sure it's happened, and we look like we don't know anything about movies by not knowing that. So why would you even ask that?
I know.
Like you're just making us look bad as a podcast. Like
that was like
call.
5 downvotes on Reddit right there.
They don't even know that in 1971 Orson Welles beat Orson Welles.
But I mean, coming off of the historically one of the best years in cinema in 1999, and his contribution to that was the Limey, which was a great film, but nowhere near,
Oh yeah, no one, yeah.
And then he follows that up in 2000 with Aaron Brockovich and Traffic, and then he goes to make Ocean's 11. I mean, what a run! We talk about first films, but we also talk about runs, and that's as great of a run as you could get. I mean, whether you like these films or not, you can't deny what they did for the industry, how successful they were critically, commercially. That's just insane. And then you follow that up with Full Frontal and Solaris the same year, and that's also great because it just shows, I just climbed Mount Everest, and now I'm going to go drink at not Starbucks. I'm going to go have a craft coffee or something. And
would you remember the 99 Oscars?
Oh, we talk about the 99 Oscars.
Yeah, like in 2002, 99 was just like, good luck stopping Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan.
Ryan, The Thin Red Line. Yeah, it was everything.
Affliction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That year was the most stacked year of all time.
Well, and I'm surprised Benigni didn't win Best Actor, honestly. Because Life is Beautiful won, so I don't know. Oh, he did win Best Actor. I'm an idiot. I don't know who I was thinking. I don't know who I was thinking. Yeah. I'm looking at it. I was like, why didn't he win? Oh, he did. Yeah. That was just the 99 Oscars were crazy. The 2000 Oscars were crazy too. And I like to go back and get mad about stuff that didn't win. But God, at the same time, it's like, oh, well, I sent all the judges a cheese wheel and I should have sent them a wristwatch. Like, so much of it is that bullshit that, like, you can get mad as you're like, why didn't Dafoe win for Best Supporting Actor in The Florida Project when he deserved to? Well, the company A24 or whatever that made the movie just didn't do the campaign, and he'll get a makeup Oscar for a worse movie, and that's just Hollywood.
These things find a way to work itself out.
But I do like to get upset.
Yeah. Just the same way as why didn't a Ghost Story win anything, and that was one of the best films made in the last 20 years. It's just one of those things. Another A24 offering. Someone that hasn't ever seen a movie before, what's the first Soderbergh film are you feeding them?
I feel like if you've never seen a Soderbergh movie, maybe start with Ocean's 11.
Is that the best kind of?
No, I feel like it's the most accessible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because it's junk food, right? But what's wrong with junk food? I feel like if you see Ocean's 11, you see, oh, this is a pretty prototypical Hollywood big budget heist movie. But I think you will see some things that Soderbergh does differently that other directors don't do. And you'll start to get a feel for what sets him apart. And then if you go and watch something, maybe you watch one more big budget movie.
See,
maybe like a Contagion.
This was kind
maybe like a Magic Mike, and then you go watch something like with a little bit of smaller budget, like Bubble, which I loved. I thought Bubble was pretty underrated.
See, this is kind of a loaded question because I feel like watching his films, almost in a chronological order, tells a lot of story. Tells a lot about who he is. Kind of like Catherine Bigelow when we talked about her. Seeing the journey of him starting from Sex Lies and then all the way coming full circle, so to speak, with Unsane.
Isn't it a gorgeous symmetry?
Yes.
The way Sex Lies and Videotape and Unsane bookend something like Ocean's 11 that is right in the middle of his filmography.
And Logan Lucky's right before Unsane, which is just perfect. It's just like he's back, he's off the bench, he's making a heist film, and he's making Sex Lies and Videotape, the sequel. And and
then he's making a movie for Netflix. And if you watch that State of the Industry address that he gave, why wouldn't he make a movie for Netflix when nobody wanted to give him money to make Behind the Candelabra except HBO, who spent the right amount of money and got the right amount of return?
Absolutely.
So as a visual storyteller, we sort of talked about like the type of stories he likes to tell, but like how does he do it? And you alluded to something he does where he likes to wash whole scenes, and he really has a very limited palette. You pick any of his movies, and he likes to either like in Magic Mike. There's so much pink everywhere in the background, like these just giant pink spots that wash.
Purple movie.
Yeah, with the solar flares. There's, if you look at any given shot, you can find 6 or 7 colors on screen max. Sometimes it's 4 or 5. There's so many scenes in Logan Lucky where there's like, okay, it's white paint and cinder block, and then he's wearing blue, he's wearing gray. That's it. We got 4 colors in this whole scene.
I like when he goes to the other end of the spectrum where everything is so washed, and then there are scenes like the scene which you alluded to when Catherine Zeta-Jones is sitting there with her girlfriends talking about the duck, and that is in a completely normal, normal, natural lighting, because it has that kind of deception of normalcy, although all this shit is happening underneath.
Because she doesn't know yet. She doesn't know she's part of it. Every character that knows they're part of it, all of a sudden it gets washed out. That's an excellent observation. Because Benicio del Toro at the very beginning of the movie, it's all washed out in taupe because he knows what he's about. He's a good cop in Mexico. And Del Toro actually went to Soderbergh and had him rewrite his part.
Oh, that I did not
because he didn't want to. He was a Machiavellian character that was like angling all the time. He's like, I don't like this dude. I'm having a hard time getting into character. So they rewrote him as like a good cop that got sucked into this stuff. So the very beginning of the movie, it's all washed out and like yellow.
Sepia, yeah.
Yeah, because they knew what they're about. But like Catherine Zeta-Jones didn't know what she was until she got sucked into it, and then you start to see her washed out in that gunmetal color.
Yep. And guess what? It also shows resolution, because at the end of towards the end of the movie, Del Toro washed in normal, natural light. It shows resolution as much as it shows, hiding things and telling what's going on in that particular spot, like the coldness of drug addiction. Michael Douglas's daughter's always washed in blue because that's
him too. All the East Coast people are washed out in blue, and if you don't notice that's what's going on. If the first time I watched Traffic, I didn't notice any of that, and it's so obvious upon rewatching. You're like, how did I miss this? Well, you are watching what's going on screen. You're not really watching. He doesn't really set up his mise en scène to spoon feed you.
Sure.
But that washing he did in Traffic that's like the best. Like Aaron Brockovich was really washed out in Sepia too. Like he does that a lot in a lot of his movies, but Traffic is probably the best example. The way like the Mexican characters are washed out in Sepia, the like Catherine Zeta-Jones and Dennis Quaid and all those characters
in that gunmetal,
in that gunmetal color, and then the like Michael Douglas, all the East Coast Washington sort of characters are washed out in blue. He will flip between scenes real fast, and he won't tell you Tijuana, present day, blah blah blah. He doesn't give you that shit because you don't need it, and you don't even realize you're being cued by the color. He groups all the scenes by, color codes them, and you don't even realize you're being primed, but you're just sort of like, before the dialogue even starts, of like, oh, there's Topher Grace because he's on the blah, blah, blah. I know what's going on. It's these people, and then they'll jump to other people, and you don't even realize you're being primed by the color washing. It's obvious when you start to see what he's doing, in hindsight, but it's so blatant that you're like, how did I miss it? But like, you just, it's something that he just basically color coded the scenes, and he loves those color washes. Full Frontal, there was there's a lot of the pink washing, and
the Liberace movie's all gold, right?
And that was just such a gorgeous movie, Behind the Candelabra, and it just. Yeah, I mean, wasn't Liberace's whole life washed in gold? Right?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably ramped up to to a 10 or to a 12.
But of course, but it had to be because he was projecting a lifestyle of opulence.
Sure.
Like I love the fact that like the gold washing, like it's like he predicted, the Donald Trump presidency with the whole like he was projecting a lifestyle, and it turned out the whole thing was fake, and it all came crashing down at the end. So like, yeah, washing everything in gold just showed how it was just, how the whole thing was kind of fake.
He also does not only not only washing, color washing, but he blows out lights too. Like one of the first scenes in The Informant where they're all sitting there, and I think at this point, Matt Damon's character is already contacted by the FBI the first time. So he and his colleagues are sitting there having lunch or dinner or whatever, and the lights up top are so hot because it's like a pressure cooker. Something's happening, something's cooking. Also, like the jump cuts is a choice, a storytelling choice where it's so obvious, but you don't know it, especially the first time you see it.
Oh, it's obvious in hindsight, and that's you get. It's like it's almost like an M. Night Shyamalan movie where you see the twist and you're like, oh, it's so obvious the whole time. The village. Oh my god.
Yeah.
The fact that you go back and you watch it, you're like, I was being primed the whole time. He knew what he was doing.
It almost makes you feel dumb, right? Like the first time you watch stuff, you're just
everything. But he's so deliberate.
Yeah.
That like, of course, someone that meticulous was going to be able to, because he understands. You have to understand the conventions of Hollywood so well to be able to subvert them the way Soderbergh does. He's a very subversive director. He's a very, reductive director. He breaks everything down, and he's parsimonious. I've used that word before. He doesn't give you anything you don't need. So as much as like he's priming you, he's also not spoon feeding you. It's really interesting the way he gives you information in a way that a lot of other directors wouldn't. He primes your mood with his color cues and his lighting cues and his musical cues and all that kind of stuff. But he also doesn't spoon feed you information through exposition dialogue or anything like that when it's not necessary. What was the biggest quote of this whole thing was, my film style technique was born of a desire to find a new way to give the audience information about the story and the character. And there has to be a better way to lay things out for people, or at least you can be more adventurous and release information in a way that's less traditional. And what's less traditional than like all of the voiceover in The Informant is horseshit. I love it. He gives you voiceover the entire movie and none of it is exposition. How good is that?
Yeah, it's all
did you catch that? It took me 3 times watching that movie to realize that it was more VO than I like, but it was all a fucking idiot. Just, wow, they don't put those nice Rioni ties on sale. It's always the bullshit with the stripes.
That's how this asshole's mind worked.
Yes. All the VO is normally like Harrison Ford, like, I'm going to spoil the whole plot of Blade Runner now. But in this movie, it was like, he's thinking, like, fuck, did I leave the iron on? As the FBI's like, we need to look up your ass. Like, it's amazing.
Mechanism too, because even at the end where they sit down, they're like, do you believe any of this? Or why are you doing this? And he just finally breaks character. He breaks through all that VO in his head, all this facade, and he just goes, I don't know. And that's like the most real delivery of the entire film. So yeah, I mean, that's just someone that is such a pathological liar that you start believing your own shit so much, where you just have to fill your head with mashed potato garbage all the time to constantly, divert you from realizing how much of an ass you are, how much of a liar you are.
Yeah. But you know what? Another thing that primed me, The Informant seems funnier than it is, because as soon as he realized he wanted it to be a comedy, he picked a ton of serious scenes to be cast by comedians.
Yep.
He's got Tom Papadopoulos, Scott Bakula, Joel McHale, Patton Oswalt. You know, Paul F. Tompkins was in this movie. I think he got cut.
He was in
You
it.
know?
Yeah.
Like, he has a lot of the major characters. Paul F. Tompkins did get credited, so I think I think some of his scenes were cut. He was I listen to a lot of Paul F. Tompkins stand up, and he talks a lot about. He has this really great anecdote. This has nothing to do with this, but he's talking about he was just on set as the movie wrapped, and Matt Damon was eating these weird cubes that were floating in this liquid. He's like, "What are the cubes?" And he did the stand up like, "What are these cubes?" And he talked about the cubes forever. And someone's like, "Did Matt Damon gain weight for the role?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, that's part of a cleanse. They like these cubes that start their weight loss cleanse after they gain weight for a role." But like, he went 6 months not knowing why Matt Damon he thought it was some weird Hollywood Illuminati thing. Like, he wasn't in the know because he wasn't eating the cubes.
Right. Because he's not this Hollywood level, person. They just cast a bunch of Joel McHales in this role.
Well, yeah, like Dick Smothers and Paul Tompkins and Patton Oswalt, and like all these comedic actors were in serious roles in this movie, and someone who recognized all those people, that primed me to think the movie was funnier than it was, just because like, oh, there's Clancy Brown, he's always doing wacky hijinks, and it's like, no,
it's Krabs. Yeah. But it's weird because you think about it and you almost feel bad for laughing at it, because really The Informant is sold as a comedy, but you're laughing at the just sheer patheticness of it, and that's but not funny if you really think about it.
But tragedy's when you cut your finger, and comedy's when you fall in an open manhole and die, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So this was just a super duper tragedy. But they could have played the movie straight, but he said if he played the movie straight, it would have felt a little bit too much, like another movie, like a repeat of Aaron Brockovich or something like that, right?
Yeah. And you got to show a movie about a pathological liar with some levity to it.
You don't have to, because the book was very serious, and everybody read the book and they're like, we want to adapt this. It's a very serious book. We loved it. It was fantastic. And somewhere along the way, he's like, look, we can't do this straight. And that was like, how many other directors would have made that choice?
Sure.
Because it was a real risk to shoot The Informant as a wacky comedy when it was based on Kurt Eichenwald's very serious book.
Kind of bringing it to a close. One of the most crazy trajectories I ever went on, as far as having a preconceived notion about who a filmmaker was and being 100% incorrect, but in a positive way, where this was the antithesis of the Refn episode, I believe, where I just thought
the deeper I got on Soderbergh, the more I realized how exacting and deeply he thinks about everything. And the Refn tricked me in a way, but he tricked me in a different way, when it was sort of like, nope, I primed you to figure the story out faster on your own. Whereas Refn sort of like, oh, look, I did some close-up magic.
Yeah.
With my soft hands that I moisturize.
Ugh, baby hands. All right. Well,
so like I feel like he tricked me a lot of the time in a lot of ways, but the kind of tricking where you go back and you're like, oh, that's how he pulled that off. And it's good to figure out how the magician did his tricks.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, that is our episode of Director's Cut for this week. Steven Soderbergh, man, this one was a ton of fun. Thank you everyone for watching this. I mean, this is really this show's really picking up steam, and I really appreciate that, and I think Jason appreciates that as well. Not just in video.
Don't put words in my mouth. Not in the least.
He doesn't care. But I mean, not just in video form, but now you could find this show on all the audio formats, your iTunes, your Spotify's, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. So what
about Stitcher? Are we on Stitcher?
We're on Stitcher first before anything else.
Hey man, don't take that tone with me.
It would be nice to know that you cared. No.
Yeah, well, I don't use Stitcher. No. If I did, I would be like, oh, there's us, but I don't. So Why are you using Stitcher, listener?
The one person listening to us on Stitcher is like, hey,
Hey, I like Stitcher. Unsubscribe.
Yeah, downvote. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Stitcher guy. Like, please listen to our next episode and let me win you back.
Yeah,
Stitcher guy.
Let's talk about the next episode real quick. I screwed up, and I don't even think I told Jason about this, but Lindsay Washburn, the awesome Lindsay, is going to join us back from. You remember her from the Stanley Kubrick film?
Yep.
Kubrick
episode.
Thank you. She'll be back. I forgot, or I think I reached out to her. I'm like, we're going to do Lars von Trier, and then somehow it morphed into Gus Van Sant. So I guess we're doing Gus Van Sant next.
You can't tell the difference between Lars von Trier and Gus Van Sant?
I'm like, yeah, let's do.
We're gonna do both of them eventually. It actually doesn't matter. But
maybe we'll just
to have Lindsay on for Gus Van Sant will I think be good.
This will be great. She'll probably be drinking her cherry.
Her wasted white girl drinks. Yeah,
just the worst. But yeah,
I just smoked the wrong end of his cigarette. Woo!
Lindsay's like, unsubscribe, downvote. Jason, where can everyone find you when you're not talking movies with me?
I'm on the Twitter at Jason Ealt, and very soon I will be developing an RSS feed so you can find all the stuff I do in a week because I'm very busy. I do a Magic the Gathering podcast. I write articles. I do content production. So I'm sort of trying to develop like an RSS feed for all the podcast appearances and different projects I do to be in one place. And if you go to Twitter at Jason E. Alt, you'll be able to find that, and you'll be able to find links to all the things I do on a weekly basis. So I feel like Twitter is a good base of operations, and I would love it if you would give me a follow on Twitter, and maybe give us a review on iTunes or something like that. Something that costs you $0 and takes a few seconds of your time, but is really invaluable for us, a fledgling podcast that's just trying to get some traction.
Absolutely. You could also follow this episode. What is wrong with? I'm really falling apart.
You love episodes, man. Good for you. Good for you.
You could find the Twitter handle that's cut_director. Because someone took director's cut, I don't know. But yeah, follow that on there. That's always a good time. You're going to see there's always clues into who we're going to be covering next because it's just flooding movie photos at you all the time. You could find me personally on Twitter at OrzovDone. You could also support this channel, everything we do, Director's Cut and everything else on Patreon, and really appreciate that. Really appreciate Kat and Anthony for being our newest patrons, and you'll see the rest of the patrons listed in the credits at the end of this video. Again, just thank you so much for liking, subscribing, all the things. This is the call to action part of the video. But until next time, we'll see you at the movies.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.